Hey everyone, congratulations, you're under contract. We're putting this video together so that you've got the information that you need to make it to the closing table in the best possible shape. We're going to be talking about all the different steps from this point to the closing table and to give you some good information moving forward. Please know that this isn't a one-size-fits-all video. There might be some specific circumstances with your deal and your transaction and your home that might not be covered in this. If you feel or discern that that might be the case, please reach out to me or one of our agents. We'll be happy to give you some guidance on that. So we're just going to jump right into it. Some good information from the under contract point moving forward. And the first thing that we're going to be talking about is don't pack your stuff up until due diligence is over. So I know what you're thinking. We're under contract. Great. Now we need to start packing our stuff up, assuming you haven't already, and move. This is for people that are currently occupied in the home that they're selling. The reason for this is that we have just gone under contract, and the first contingency that the buyers have is called due diligence. During this point of time, for any reason whatsoever, the buyers can break contract and get their earnest money back. Typically, this is the rockiest portion of a deal, and this is when the likelihood of the deal falling apart is the greatest. Not to scare you at all, but those are the statistics. So the buyers are going to have an inspection. If something turns up on the inspection that's just a major deal killer, or we can't come to an agreement, or they're just being unreasonable, then we might have to forfeit the deal and go back onto the market. And if you've already packed up all your stuff at that point, it's not going to show well. So talk to your agent, or at least wait until due diligence is entirely over to start packing up all of your stuff. If you want to start packing up some of your smaller stuff that's like not show worthy, like stuff in your drawers, and start putting that in boxes, that's fine. Just keep in mind the staging for your house needs to be kept up well all the way through due diligence. So that's tip number one. Tip number two, earnest money should be deposited soon. This isn't really a tip as much as it is just information. The buyers will be putting their earnest money into an escrow account as soon as possible. It's about 1%. Most of the time. Again, sometimes we see earnest money greater than that. Sometimes we see it less. But if you've got a $300,000 house that you went under contract for full asking price, we're looking at about $3,000 in earnest money that will be placed into escrow within a certain amount of time designated on the contract by the buyers and their buyer's agent. Again, this is kind of like skin in the game, and not to get too deep into what earnest money is and what it's for, you should know that the earnest money should be deposited soon after a binding agreement date. Tip and information bit number three. Let's talk about the inspection. As soon as we go under contract, the buyers are going to be scheduling an inspection most of the time. Again, this doesn't always happen, but most of the time, 9 times out of 10, a buyer is going to have an inspection on the property that they are going to be buying. Georgia's a buyer beware state, which means all the responsibility of the transaction or due diligence is on the shoulders of the buyer. And so they're going to be having an inspection that's, they generally last around 2, maybe 3 hours long at the top end, depending on the size of the house and the scope of the test that they're doing. And they can have inspections outside of just a general home inspection, a radon test. They want to have specific contractors come in, like an HVAC guy. All of that's entirely built into the contract, and they have the ability to do it, assuming that they've given reasonable notice to the sellers to come in for an appointment. So during this time, again, 2-3 hours for an inspection. It typically takes 12 to 24 hours to get the inspection back, depending on how quick the inspector is and how much work that they have. And then from that point on, we negotiate. Sometimes we negotiate strong, sometimes we negotiate weak, sometimes right in the middle. It depends on what's on the inspection report. And then obviously that's a case-by-case basis, and you and your agent will be in touch about how to proceed from that point on. But you might need to be out of your house for a few hours. You're welcome to, technically you could stay there during the inspection if you want to. I would advise not being there during the inspection if you can help it at all. Just makes things go a little bit smoother. The buyers feel more comfortable if the seller isn't around. I'm sure you can imagine that on the other side. So tip number 4, start considering when to turn your utilities off. This is really just a good idea to start getting numbers and, rounding up all the different utility services that you might use on your property and have a game plan of when to turn them off. Typically, we advise the day of closing to turn them off or the day after. It's courteous to extend an extra day to your buyers that are coming in to buy your property, give them a little bit of extra margin to get those utilities lined up. Again, not a one-size-fits-all piece of advice, but for the most part, it seems to be pretty sound. And then let's talk about all of the contingencies inside of a contract on what you just signed. If we haven't covered this already, now would be a great time to actually cover it. So there's 3 contingencies normally that are afforded to a buyer when you go under contract. Number 1 is due diligence, and we've already kind of covered this. This is a period of time where the buyers are able to do their own due diligence on the property through whatever kind of inspections that they would like to during that period. And again, during that period of time, they can break contract for any reason at all and get their earnest money back. That means if they found another house that they like better, if they got cold feet, they just don't feel like buying a house anymore, doesn't matter. They can break contract, get their earnest money back, and they're just out money for the inspection if they even got one at that point. So contingency number 2 that's afforded to the buyers is called the financial contingency. And again, all of these contingencies start ticking. Time is of the essence as soon as there is a bound contract. From that date moving forward, it's all based on time. And so the financial contingency we see, around the 21-day mark. Again, it can be less than that, over that. It's really whatever is just negotiated, but we see that a lot of the time. And that covers the buyers in case that they can't actually obtain a loan for some reason. In order for them to break contract and get their earnest money back from that contingency, the lender has to write what's called a loan denial letter. And it has to be for very specific reasons that they can't qualify for a loan. It can't be because they were just lazy and didn't get all their documents in on time. It can't be for a litany of other reasons. It has to be for very specific reasons, but that still covers the buyer just in case they can't get approved for a loan. Contingency number 3 is the appraisal contingency. Let's say we go under contract at $250,000. You're the seller, and the appraisal comes back in at $235,000. Well, that's a $15,000 difference that the bank is not going to finance, and that means that you're not obligated to sell it for $235,000, but the buyers aren't obligated to buy it at that price either. Really, what happens is we go back to the negotiation table. There's a couple of different ways that we can go about it. You can call for a appraisal challenge or a rebuttal. We can go that route. We can negotiate and see if the buyer will bring some sort of money out of pocket to the table to close the difference. Most of the time, what happens is that sellers wind up dropping down to the appraised value. It is a weakened position to negotiate from, and you're not in a good position of leverage at that point as a seller if the appraisal does come in light, which we try to get out in front of before we even recommend a price to list the property on. So those are really the big 3 contingencies. Again, they don't always have to be on every contract, but they are very common, and you should know about them from this point moving forward. So congratulations again. If you have any questions about the content of this video or anything that is in your specific circumstances, please reach out to me or your agent, and we'll be glad to take care of you. Talk to you soon.